Now, the weekend before last, there were a couple of mass shootings which brought up the old video games cause mass shootings dodge. And before we get on to this, it is a dodge. While media does help propagate ideas, and while video games are media and they are an art form and they do affect people on, an emotional, and if they engage critically with said media, intellectual level, they do not cause behaviors. I'm getting that out of the way at the beginning before we continue on, because all this talk about video games supposedly causing mass shootings reminded me of a few quotes by a psychiatrist whose work had actually got him in front of the Senate, specifically one of the subcommittees of the Judiciary Committee. And I'm gonna tweak the quotes a little bit and then explain how they were tweaked, but after I read them out, and we'll get a little bit further in depth. However, before I continue, I will say that this isn't really atheist content. It's more touching on censorship and hopefully building a more solid foundation for some concepts we're going to explore later on in the channel. So, without further ado, let's get into the quotations, so to speak. And here's the first one. A natural scientist who had looked over video games expressed this to me tersely. In video games, life is worth nothing. There is no dignity of a human being. And we'll kind of move on to the second one, because they're very much in the same vein. And, why hit with one quote from one source when the source has multiple quotes? So, the world of the video game is the world of the strong, the ruthless, the bluffer, the shred deceiver, the torturer, and the thief. And finally, from this figure's testimony before the subcommittee to investigate juvenile delinquency, I think Hitler was a beginner compared to the video game industry. Now, here's how I tweaked the quotes. They're not about video games. They're about comic books. In 1954, Frederick Wortham published a book called Seduction of the Innocent. It alleged that comic books had a causal relationship with juvenile delinquency. And it had caused such a sensation, such a moral panic, because America loves its moral panics, all the way from alcohol in, the late 19th century / early 20th century, all the way to this video game hysteria that we have currently, with a little reefer madness and red scares mixed in. Just to liven things up. Seems like America feels like things get dull without, if there's a few years without a moral panic going on along the line. But anyways, so now the comic book industry was extremely intimidated by the way these hearings were going, because it looked like the government was going to step in and shut everything down, or at least, heavily censor them. So they decided to head the government, instead of fighting, they decided to head the government off and censor themselves. And created something called the Comics Code Authority, which was in effect until the late 90s. Now, it did start dying off, say, around 1985, I think, is when it was like on its dying breath, and during the last legs of the Comics Code Authority, the only person reviewing, the only comics that had the little seal of approval were Archie comics, and it was a little old lady doing it in her basement because she believed in the cause. No, seriously, you should look it up. It's kind of a wild story, but back to the point. So they decided to censor themselves, and I'll go ahead and read through a few of the more egregious standards of the Comics Code Authority. The specified code. There will be a link to the full code in the description, and if you guys like this, maybe I'll make a video going through the entire thing, because it is really bonkers how restrictive this self-induced censorship was. And so, we'll get a few bullet points out, hit the highlights at least, So, crimes shall never be presented in such a way as to create sympathy for the criminal, to promote distrust of the forces of law and justice, or to inspire others with a desire to imitate criminals. So pretty much anyone who wants to make like an outlaw comic, say they were wronged by an unjust system and they're fighting for the common man. Your basic Robin Hood, outlaw with a heart of gold story. No, can't do those. They're against the code. And so you won't get the seal of approval. They won't go on the shelves. Policemen, judges, government officials, and respected institutions shall never be presented in such a way as to create disrespect for established authority. So if you want to use your comic book to say anything about institutional racism or corruption in the police, no, you're not getting your seal of approval. You can just put that in the shredder. Put that idea into the dustbin. It's not safe for America's youth. If crime is depicted, it shall be as a sordid and unpleasant activity. Once again, keeping in with that, we don't want the youth to think that crime is okay. So, if you want to do a graphic novel of, say, Ocean's 11 under the Comics Code, can't do that. Can't do that. Scenes of excessive violence shall be prohibited. Scenes of brutal torture, excessive and unnecessary knife and gunplay, physical agony, gory and gruesome crime shall be eliminated. And see, this right here is part of the reason why in what we call the Silver Age, Batman got really, really toned down. Like, if you look at old, like, 1940s Batman comics, he straight up murdered people. Wolverine, the Punisher, those people came after the Comics Code Authority was already kind of crumbling, because obviously none of that would have flown. Now, here's a good one. Here's showing how completely arbitrary these rules are. The letters of the word crime on a comics magazine cover shall never be appreciably greater in dimension than the other words contained in the title. The word crime shall never appear alone on the cover. Now, that, yeah, goes without saying. You can understand how bonkers, arbitrary, and restrictive that specific bullet point is. And onto the next one, shall we? This is actually kind of fun. Inclusion of stories dealing with evil shall be used or shall be published only where the intent is to illustrate a moral issue, and in no case shall evil be presented alluringly, nor so as to injure the sensibilities of the reader. Now, remember, this is 1950s America. Your apple pie and, your apple pie and Chevy and Leave It to Beaver. So, think about those sensibilities. Now, also, this kind of reminds me of some of the more, of how evangelicals approach their, pseudo censorship. Anything that's, deals with evil shall, it has to show that evil is nasty and gross and you don't want anything to do with it. You better get right with Jesus, I tell you. Yeah. So if you don't get right with Jesus, then the evil will get you, and you don't want the evil because it's scary and nasty and you don't want anything to do with it. But, so, scenes dealing with or instruments associated with Walking Dead, torture, vampires and vampirism, ghouls, cannibalism, and werewolfism are prohibited. So, yeah, basically any kind of supernatural, anything that'll give you the slightest hint of the heebie-jeebies factor, which is also why horror comics died out, in the 50s, because they were straight up banned. And also, once again, touching on how evangelicals, censor themselves, it's, you gotta walk a really fine line if you want to write a Christian horror comic, or if you want to write a Christian horror novel or a Christian thriller novel, because you can't because you've got to show it. There's a very limited way in how you're allowed to present the supernatural if you're going to do so when writing a Christian, novel or novella, which is a topic in its own right, and we will get to it. So let's move on, shall we? Although slang and colloquialisms are acceptable, excessive use should be discouraged, and whenever possible, good grammar shall be employed. Once again, so if you wanted to do, say, a graphic novel of Huckleberry Finn, which is narrated from the viewpoint of a poor pre-Civil War white hick boy. No, can't do that under that'll get nixed by the, you won't get your seal of approval, which means won't get on the shelves. Now, we get into the section on sex, romance, and relationships, because of course there was a section on that, and of course it's I I couldn't even pick highlights out of this. I'm just gonna go through it in its whole, because once again, this is 1950s America, apple pie, Leave It to Beaver Americana we're talking about. So, if you can kind of think with that mindset, you'll get how crazy restrictive these are, right? Divorce shall not be treated humorously nor represented as desirable. Illicit sex relations are neither to be hinted at nor portrayed. Violent love scenes as well as sexual abnormalities are unacceptable. And I'll repeat the last clause, because once again we're talking 1950s America. As well as sexual abnormalities are unacceptable. So no LGBT/GRSM content is allowed. Or, just put it in the shredder because it's not going to get distributed. Respect for parents, the moral code, and for honorable behavior shall be fostered. A sympathetic understanding of the problems of love is not a license for morbid distortion. You gotta teach little Billy how to be a good boy, which means how he's gotta shove any sense of human feeling or desire down when it comes to, people of the opposite gender, people of other genders, as, until he's married. But if little Billy happens to be bisexual or homosexual, then, well, sorry, Billy, you're just gonna have to you're just gonna have to not, let's just not little Billy. But so the treatment of live romance stories shall emphasize the value of the home and the sanctity of marriage. Goes without saying, once again, we're talking the kind of 1950s America that certain sections of the population, certain evangelicals, certain fundamentalists, certain Republicans, certain conservative people want us to go back to. Passion or romantic interest shall never be treated in such a way as to stimulate the lower and baser emotions. You can't draw, you can't draw pinups. You gotta keep it tame. Maybe a little kiss on the cheek between married people, that might be okay, but otherwise, in the shredder you go. Seduction and rape shall never be shown or suggested. I'll leave off the pithy comment for that. Sex perversion or any I cannot talk. Okay, this is the last one right here. Sex perversion or any inference to the same is strictly forbidden. Once again, we're talking 1950s America, Leave It to Beaver, I Love Lucy mindset. So basically, by those standards, a guy kissing a guy would be quote unquote sex perversion. All the various Batman and Robin jokes will actually the quote unquote good Dr. Wortham had a big problem with Batman and Robin, because even then there were allusions made, and so the reason I bring this up, and the reason I brought up the whole video game thing, and the reason I've tied a couple of the bullet points in to, in with the evangelical, way, the way certain evangelicals approach media, is just kind of to show how similar it is, and the way my approach is, genres in media are not inherently bad, are not inherently harmful. Genres and forms of media are not inherently inappropriate. Save for one, but the kind of that specific genre that people enjoy behind closed doors with the lights down low is one of the, it's one of the few that's defined by its content. Theming and story elements do not content make, and it's the content that matters. That's why you need to engage critically with what media you consume before you say, oh, we can't have that, or oh, this is the bee's knees. But hopefully I've given you some food for thought. Next week we're gonna kind of take a break from the whole media and culture angle. Gonna try out something new next week. But anyways, like the video, share, subscribe, leave a comment if you have any reactions. And thank you for watching, and have a nice day.